When it comes to handling toxic people, the very first step is to understand what's driving their behavior. Most of us react emotionally to toxic people because we're focused on what they're doing to us, how they talk to us, how they make us feel small, or how they manipulate situations to their advantage. But to be effective in dealing with them, we must step back and look at them from a psychological lens. The more you understand someone's internal motivations, the less power they have over you. Toxicity is rarely random. It is almost always rooted in insecurity, fear, or a need for control. These individuals often operate from a place of emotional deficiency. Their need to dominate, belittle, or constantly critique others often stems from deep internal voids, whether it's unresolved trauma, self-loathing, or the need to feel significant by tearing others down. This is where your emotional intelligence must step in. Ask yourself, why is this person acting this way? What are they trying to get out of this interaction? Once you start asking those questions, you move from being emotionally reactive to being psychologically strategic. For example, a person who constantly gossips and puts others down may be doing so to divert attention from their own flaws. Someone who is consistently passive-aggressive may not know how to communicate their needs directly or may fear confrontation. A manipulative person may feel powerless unless they control others. These behaviors, while damaging, are often masks for deep-rooted fear, inadequacy, or pain. By looking beyond the surface, you shift your perception from personal offense to professional detachment. It's not about excusing their behavior. It's about disarming it. Understanding doesn't mean you tolerate abuse. It means you can analyze the situation with clarity and decide what tactical response is best. When you know someone is operating out of insecurity, for instance, you don't need to validate their attacks with your emotional energy. You recognize their need to provoke, and you refuse to reward it. This is where self-awareness becomes your armor. When you understand the psychology behind toxicity, you stop internalizing their words and actions. If someone insults you, tries to control you, or disrespects your boundaries, and you've done your inner work, you can pause and realize, this is about them, not you. You don't absorb the venom because you've built a shield of understanding. This internal distance is essential. Without it, you end up becoming emotionally entangled in their dysfunction. You start defending yourself, explaining yourself, or worse, changing yourself to accommodate their chaos. You must train yourself to see the patterns. Toxic people operate in cycles: gaslighting, guilt, tripping, blame, shifting. These aren't just behaviors, they're tools designed to manipulate outcomes in their favor. Once you recognize these patterns, you can detach from them emotionally and create a mental playbook for how to respond. Just as an agent would profile a subject to understand their triggers, habits, and vulnerabilities, you must do the same. Know who you're dealing with, study their tactics, anticipate their moves, and never walk into a situation with them without a clear emotional plan. This mindset puts you back in control. When you stop taking toxic behavior personally, you regain power. You begin to lead the interaction instead of reacting to it. You learn to pivot, to disengage strategically, and to hold your ground without becoming aggressive or defensive. Toxic people want emotional chaos. They want you thrown off balance because when you're emotional, you're easier to control. So your job is to be the calm in the storm. The more volatile they become, the more grounded you remain. That groundedness comes from understanding, and understanding is what separates professionals from victims. Also, it's important to recognize the difference between someone who is having a bad moment and someone who is chronically toxic. Everyone has bad days. We all say things we regret, but toxic people operate from a persistent mindset that's built around control, ego, and emotional manipulation. They are not looking for connection. They're looking for dominance. This distinction matters. If you mislabel toxic behavior as normal, you'll excuse it. If you mislabel a toxic person as just misunderstood, you'll keep giving them access to you, and that access is dangerous. Once you've done this psychological work, you can also see more clearly who is capable of change and who isn't. Some people act toxic because they don't know better, because that's how they were raised or what they've seen modeled. But some people act toxic because it works for them. They get what they want, they manipulate others, they avoid accountability, and for them, there's no incentive to change. Your job is not to fix them. Your job is to protect yourself. You do that by understanding who they are and deciding, with clarity and without emotion, what role, if any, they will have in your life moving forward. This level of psychological clarity gives you emotional freedom. You no longer get pulled into their drama. You no longer feel compelled to explain yourself, justify your boundaries, or shrink to keep the peace. You know who you are. You know what's driving them. And because of that, you're able to rise above the noise and respond with precision, not panic. That is how you disarm a toxic person, by refusing to give them what they want most, your emotional control. Dealing with toxic people isn't just about what you say to them. It's about how you manage your own emotional responses in real time. One of the smartest and most overlooked tools you can develop is emotional control. Toxic individuals thrive on your reactions. That's their fuel. When they can get under your skin, make you raise your voice, doubt yourself, or defend your choices, they gain control of the situation. Emotional control strips that power away from them. You don't let them dictate how you feel or how you respond. Instead, you become intentional, deliberate, and calm. That calmness becomes your weapon. Learning to manage your emotions isn't about suppressing them. It's about channeling them so you stay in charge of your own narrative. When a toxic person tries to provoke you, what they're really testing is whether they can hijack your emotional state. If you get defensive, they win. If you argue, they feed off it. If you cry, they'll use it against you later. That's why you must develop emotional discipline. Because in these moments, your silence, your composure, your stillness can be more powerful than any argument. Tactical communication is the second half of the equation. Once you've regulated your internal state, you need to be intentional about what you say and how you say it. Toxic people often speak in loaded language. They twist words, interrupt, accuse, and play the victim. Responding to this requires precision and control. You don't fight chaos with more chaos. You de-escalate it with clarity. You don't get dragged into their spiral. You anchor yourself, and you hold the line. One effective approach is to use assertive language that is calm, firm, and neutral. Avoid emotional language. Don't explain, over-apologize, or justify. The moment you start justifying your boundary, you're giving them an opening to debate it. Instead, you use short, clear statements that are grounded in self-respect. I'm not available for that conversation. I hear you, but that doesn't work for me. We'll have to agree to disagree. These phrases are boundary-driven and emotionally neutral. They don't invite further conflict, but they make your position unshakably clear. Another tactical tool is redirection. When a toxic person tries to steer the conversation into manipulation or drama, you redirect it to facts, boundaries, or an exit. If someone tries to guilt you, you might say, I understand you feel that way. I still need to make this choice for myself. If they lash out, you can respond, I'm not going to continue this conversation if it stays at this tone. You're not attacking. They want a fight. You're steering. You're showing that you are the one in control of how this conversation will proceed. The key is consistency. Toxic people test your limits over and over. They're looking for cracks. One moment of emotional reaction can reset all the progress you've made. That's why developing a consistent internal system for emotional regulation is so critical. Think of it like training a muscle. You prepare in los, takes moments so you're ready when the real conflict comes. You practice not reacting to passive-aggressive comments. You work on breathing through tension. You rehearse how to say no without apologizing. This is not about being cold. It's about being in control. You also need to understand your own emotional triggers. What makes you react? Is it being disrespected, being lied to, being criticized? When you know what triggers you, you can catch the reaction before it takes over. You pause, you breathe, you assess the situation as if you're watching it from the outside. Toxic people want you to be reactive because it makes you easier to manipulate. If you can see the tactic as it's happening, if you recognize the guilt, trip, the subtle insult, the bait, you can choose not to bite. You can respond like someone who's trained, someone who knows what the game is and refuses to play. It's also important to remember that silence is a strategic response. You don't have to reply to every jab, answer every message, or attend every argument you're invited to. Sometimes, not responding at all sends the strongest message. It communicates disinterest, self-control, and power. It shows the toxic person that they don't have access to your peace of mind, that they don't get to influence your emotional climate. And when you do speak, speak with purpose. Every word should be intentional. You don't need to win the argument. You need to maintain your boundary. Toxic people will often try to derail conversations by making it personal, attacking your character, or shifting the blame. Stay on track, repeat yourself if needed. Don't allow them to reframe the narrative. That's not what I said. We're not going to talk about the past. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to set a boundary. One of the most powerful tactics is the broken record technique. You say your boundary once, and then calmly repeat it no matter how many times they try to challenge it. It's not emotional. It's not aggressive. It's firm. Toxic people eventually get frustrated when they realize you can't be moved or baited. That frustration often causes them to either escalate, in which case you disengage, or back off because you're not giving them what they want. Ultimately, when you combine emotional regulation with tactical communication, you become unshakable. You don't just survive toxic interactions, you control them. You stop being reactive and start being proactive. You no longer play defense, you take the lead. That's the mindset shift. You're not just trying to protect yourself from a toxic person. You're showing up as the most grounded, controlled version of yourself, and when you do that, you make it clear, without yelling, without proving anything, that no one gets to hijack your peace. That is real power. When dealing with toxic people, one of the smartest things you can do is to build and maintain boundaries that are clear, firm, and non-negotiable. Boundaries are not about being rude or shutting people out. They are about protecting your peace, time, and energy. When you don't have boundaries in place, you give toxic people unfiltered access to your emotional and mental space, and they will take full advantage of that access, not because they misunderstand, but because they rely on your silence or discomfort to continue their behavior. A strong boundary begins with clarity. You must first understand for yourself what your limits are, what you will tolerate, what you won't, what drains you, and what protects you. Most people skip this step. They try to enforce boundaries they haven't fully defined, and then wonder why those boundaries get crossed. You need to sit with yourself and identify what specifically makes you feel unsafe, disrespected, or manipulated. Once you identify those behaviors, you can begin designing boundaries around them that act as safeguards, not walls, but filters. Consistency is the next pillar of boundary setting. A boundary means nothing if it's enforced inconsistently. Toxic people are often highly skilled at testing limits. They will push against your line just to see if you'll hold it. And if you waver even once, if you say no, and then allow a maybe, or let them guilt you into a yes, they will know they can erode that boundary over time. That's why you need to be rock solid. If you say, I don't engage in conversations where I'm being yelled at, then the moment that yelling starts, you exit the conversation, not in a dramatic, emotional way, but with clarity and calmness. You don't argue, you don't explain, you walk away or end the call. That action communicates the boundary far louder than any words. One of the biggest reasons people hesitate to set boundaries is guilt. We're conditioned to think that if we say no, we're being selfish, that if we protect our time, we're being rude. But that's the very mindset that toxic people exploit. They rely on your guilt. They depend on your need to be liked, to be perceived as nice. So they push, manipulate, and test you. because they know you'll hesitate. The truth is, saying no is not mean. Refusing to be disrespected is not cruel. Protecting your peace is not a betrayal of kindness. It is a necessary act of self-respect. Boundaries also need to be communicated clearly. You cannot expect people, especially toxic ones, to read your mind or intuit your needs. You must spell it out. This doesn't mean launching into a defensive monologue. It means delivering your boundary with simple, direct language. I'm not comfortable discussing that. I won't be answering calls after 8 p.m. I'm not available to help you with that anymore. These statements are not up for negotiation. You don't owe a toxic person long explanations, justifications, or emotional labor. The more concise and neutral your tone, the more powerful your boundary becomes. You must also be prepared for pushback. Toxic people don't respect boundaries. They see them as threats to their control. When you first begin enforcing boundaries, things may actually get worse before they get better. They might escalate, become more manipulative, play the victim, or try to guilt trip you. That's part of the process. It's their way of testing whether your boundary is real or just a performance. Your job in these moments is to remain calm and hold your line. Let them react, let them accuse. Let them walk away if they want. That reaction says everything about them and nothing about you. A boundary is only as effective as your willingness to act on it. If you say, "If you speak to me that way again, I will not continue this relationship," and then they do, and you stay, then your words mean nothing. That's why consequences are essential, not threats, not ultimatums, quiet, firm consequences. This behavior doesn't work for me, so I'm going to distance myself. If this continues, I'll be limiting our contact. You don't argue it. You don't repeat yourself 100 times. You take action. Over time, toxic people learn that you're not someone who can be manipulated with guilt, fear, or pressure. And here's the real magic of boundaries. They don't just keep toxicity out. They elevate your self-worth. Every time you enforce a boundary, you're reinforcing to yourself that your peace matters, that your voice matters, and that you are worth protecting. That inner alignment builds strength, resilience, and confidence. You stop being afraid of other people's reactions, and you start honoring your own truth. Boundaries are also contagious. When you start enforcing them, others begin to treat you with more respect. You raise the standard of what's acceptable. People learn how to treat you by watching how you treat yourself. And even if the toxic person never changes, you change. You stop tolerating chaos. You stop explaining your worth. You stop accepting the bare minimum and calling it love, friendship, or family. In the end, boundaries are not just tools. They are declarations. They say, "This is who I am. This is what I allow. This is how I choose to live." And once you start living by those declarations, you attract better relationships, healthier environments, and a stronger sense of peace. Because toxic people cannot survive where boundaries are honored. They rely on confusion, guilt, and access. But when you take all three away, they lose their grip. That's not just emotional survival, that's emotional freedom. When dealing with toxic people, your mindset is either your strongest weapon or your biggest liability. Most people approach these situations from a place of emotional exhaustion, confusion, or even fear. They react instead of respond. They get pulled into toxic dynamics because they haven't shifted from being a passive participant to becoming a strategic thinker, and that shift is everything. When you start thinking like a strategist, not a victim, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What's really going on here, and what's the smartest move I can make?" Toxic people often thrive on emotional chaos. They want you to be reactive, flustered, unsure of yourself, because when you're emotional, you're easier to manipulate. Your judgment becomes clouded, your confidence wavers, and you make decisions based on pressure instead of principles. This is why your greatest advantage is emotional detachment, not coldness, not indifference, but the ability to pause and see the situation from a higher perspective. You stop being the chess piece and you become the chess player. Being strategic doesn't mean being fake or manipulative. It means being intentional, You're no longer operating from impulse, you're operating from clarity. For example, instead of getting drawn into a pointless argument, you might ask yourself, what does this person gain by baiting me? You'll often find that their goal isn't resolution, it's control, so why play into it? Why waste your energy explaining yourself to someone who's committed to misunderstanding you? A strategist understands that not every attack requires a defense. Some situations are best handled with silence, distance, or a redirection of energy. A powerful mental shift is to start observing toxic behavior like a behavioral scientist. Detach just enough to say, interesting. This person always creates drama when they're not the center of attention. Or every time they're wrong, they deflect with blame. When you analyze instead of absorb, you take back your power. You stop seeing the toxic person as a threat and start seeing them as a pattern. And once you understand the pattern, you can disrupt it, neutralize it, or walk away from it completely. Another critical aspect of thinking like a strategist is having a plan. You don't go into a conversation with a toxic person unprepared. You think through what they might say, how they might twist things, and what your response will be. You rehearse your boundaries. You identify your triggers in advance. You decide how long you're willing to engage and what your exit strategy will be. This isn't overthinking. It's protecting your peace. Toxic people are often skilled at ambushing you emotionally, but when you're prepared, their tactics lose their impact. A strategist also understands that not every battle is worth fighting. Some relationships aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be released. Part of being strategic is recognizing when your energy is better spent elsewhere. You don't need to win an argument or prove a point to someone who's not listening. You don't need closure from someone who's incapable of accountability. Sometimes the smartest move is to walk away and let them wrestle with the silence. You also need to remember that you're not here to rescue or reform toxic people. That's not your mission. You're not their therapist, their fixer, or their emotional dumping ground. Your role is to protect your mental space, operate from a place of self-respect, and make decisions that align with your values. When you let go of the need to change them, you free yourself from the cycle. You stop wasting energy trying to convince them to be someone they're not, and you start reclaiming that energy for yourself. There's also power in playing the long game. Toxic people often win in the short term because they provoke quick reactions. But over time, consistency wins. A strategist doesn't just think about today's interaction. They consider how their choices impact the long-term outcome. You may not get immediate peace, but over time, your emotional discipline, your clear boundaries, and your consistent behavior create a climate where toxicity can no longer thrive. Thinking strategically also means managing your expectations. Stop expecting toxic people to act with integrity, empathy, or self-awareness. Expect them to behave as they always have, and you won't be shocked when they do. When you remove unrealistic expectations, you stop setting yourself up for emotional injury. You start navigating interactions from a place of preparation instead of hope. You adjust your tactics based on who they actually are, not who you wish they were. Being strategic also means deciding who deserves access to you. Not everyone should have the same level of proximity to your life. Just because someone is loud doesn't mean they deserve your attention. Just because they're persistent doesn't mean they deserve a response. A strategist guards their time, their energy, and their emotional bandwidth. They know that what they allow is what continues, and they become highly selective about who gets to be part of their mental space. In the end, this mindset isn't just about dealing with toxic people. It's about becoming a version of yourself that cannot be easily shaken. You learn to operate from inner strength instead of outer chaos. You learn to anticipate instead of react, and you learn to prioritize peace over performance. That's the difference between someone who survives toxic situations and someone who rises above them. You stop waiting for the toxic person to change, and instead, you change your strategy. You reclaim your power, you master your mind, and when you do that, No toxic person can control the outcome because you've already taken control of yourself.